Welcome in everyone on this Friday. This is your stimulus economic update for Friday. This is a big day because the House of Representatives is set to vote on the HEROES Act. This is the $3 trillion monstrous package from the House of Representatives. Democrats, no Republicans were really involved in the negotiations with this thing at all. It was really a Democratic bill, so we'll get to that. That vote will happen later today when then it's likely to pass. It's going to go over to the Senate. And we're hearing that this thing will be dead on arrival. So we'll get to all of those details. Plus, we're going to talk today also about what's going to happen with housing. We're going to hear from Secretary Ben Carson on extending that deadline if people can't pay their mortgages or can't pay their rent. Those moratoriums on evictions, what will happen there? He was pressed on this a little bit because the deadline is coming up and there doesn't seem to be much movement on that. There's all this talk right now about reopening and how that's going to solve all of our problems, but I'm going to go into why that's not the case. Because now we have some data about certain states that are reopening. And it's not about the cases, it's not about the new virus cases. It's really about the people putting money back into the economy and what's actually happening now that states have relaxed certain rules. So we'll get to that. We'll also take a look at what happened in Wisconsin overnight. Holy smokes, after that court case was decided that said these stay-at-home orders could go out and party, go and do what you want to do. There's a lot of confusion in Wisconsin this morning. I know I've heard from a lot of you that are not happy about what happened, and you're saying, please stay home. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on Wisconsin's reopening. We'll also hear from Republicans and what the next move looks like from Republicans on a possible stimulus bill and when we might see that. But first, let's get to the very latest on this. And what we're hearing now from Republicans is that once this bill comes out of the House, it will be dead on arrival over in the Senate. And here is Mitch McConnell speaking to Bret Baier last night. And Bret Baier, to his credit, pressed him on this, saying, look, why wouldn't this just be a first salvo in a negotiation? Why are you saying this is dead on arrival? Listen to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell on the Republican side in the Senate.
You called the Speaker's efforts just a political marker. Why not take that as the first in a first serve and volley back and forth as you all have done before?
Well, it's an 1,800-page liberal wish list. It strikes me as hardly salvageable. Just to give you an example of some of the absurdity, there's money in there for illegal immigrants. It mentions the word cannabis, of all things, 68 times more than the word jobs or hire are mentioned in the entire bill. It's a parade of absurdities that can hardly be taken seriously. Let me tell you what I will predict, Brett. Brett, I think the President and Senate Republican majorities will be on the same page when we get to the point where we need to do another bill. And our red line is going to be liability protections for those who are brave enough to begin to open up the economy again in the wake of the trial lawyers who are descending already on hospitals and doctors and businesses. As of about a week and a half ago, 771 lawsuits had already been filed. So we're working on a narrowly crafted protection from liability for things directly related to the coronavirus, and that will have to be a part of any package, because if we're really going to get the economy up and going again, people have to be brave enough to begin to engage in economic activity. How about the presidents of universities?
So he's talking about universities there and what's going to happen with the reopening of schools. We already saw Cal State say no one's coming back in the fall. You're going to do virtual classes. But I love his sort of, laugh at the beginning. That this is just a parade of liberal absurdities. In fact, so Nancy Pelosi came out and said, look, that there has about, in this bill, there's 80% of the priorities in the HEROES Act have been supported by Republicans. 80% of what's in this current bill was supported by Republicans. In fact, in the 4 of the previous COVID-19 acts that they already put before Congress. She says we're proud of the bipartisanship that we put forward before and look forward to negotiations. But she knows that this thing going over the Senate right now is going to be dead on arrival. That's what the president said. That's what Senate Republicans are saying, that it doesn't even really stand a chance. So their red line right now is really focused on reopening and making sure that businesses don't get sued out of existence. That's their priority. And when will they take this up? If it does come over to the Senate and they actually want to put something together, this is when they're saying it will take place, after Memorial Day. Republicans in the Senate say they won't really have any kind of a response bill until after Memorial Day, which is Monday, May 25th. Monday, May 25th. Now, he did agree with something that Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said just the other day in his speech, which I brought to you in yesterday's show. And of course, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said we need to spend more right now. They've used just about everything in their tool chest to go after this thing. And now it's up to Congress to spend more to get money into the hands of Americans. But he said, well, the one thing we don't know, though, from the Fed chairman is when. He didn't give us a timeline on that. So right now we want to kind of slow our roll, take things slowly, and see where this is going to go. Chuck Schumer, though, not in agreement with that approach to this. He spoke out against this last night. Take a listen.
The president has said that he thinks it's dead on arrival. So what is the game plan after Friday? What are Democrats going to do when we're seeing 3 million more people file for unemployment just this week?
Well, I think there'll be massive pressure on the Republican Party in the Senate, on President Trump, and particularly on Leader McConnell to move forward. Just look at what Chairman Powell said yesterday. He said we need fiscal relief. He's used just about every tool in his monetary toolbox that he can use. But if we don't have fiscal relief, he said he feared that the damage to the economy would be permanent. And in the first COVID bill and in the second COVID bill, COVID 3, COVID 3.5, McConnell and the Republicans initially resisted. But public pressure, the demand to do something because the economy is in such bad shape, forced them to come to the table. I believe that will happen again. Look, we have the greatest economic and healthcare crisis that we've had, certainly since World War II, certainly since the Great Depression.
So, since the Great Depression. And those numbers don't lie right now. That's actually what we're sitting in right now. And when you look at what our job losses were just yesterday, when that data came out yesterday, and I brought it to you live here on the show, over 3 million people who filed for unemployment just yesterday, or just this week. That puts us up to 36 million people without a job. So this idea of reopening, that's great to reopen, but reopen to what and go back to where? And the idea that this money will be flowing into the economy again once we reopen is kind of garbage right now, because we actually have some data out of some of the states that have started to reopen. And we'll get to that a little bit later, specifically Georgia. But I want to play for you now the speaker's response, because she was asked about this. Jim Cramer asked her last night about this, that there's a lot to like in this bill. What are you guys going to do? Try to get some negotiation here between you and Republicans. And here's what House Speaker Pelosi had to say last night on this. She's sort of getting fed up with the idea of we're going to pause things and wait till after Memorial Day, to take this stuff up. She wants to see this move forward. And so she had this to say about the idea of pausing right now.
And I would say to those who say we should have a pause, well, as you know, hunger doesn't have a pause, bills don't have a pause, and coming rent doesn't have a pause. Just the pain of those who are out of work doesn't have a pause until we can open our economy and do so in a scientifically safe way. It's no mystery. The scientists all agree. Test, trace, treat.
But Madam Speaker.
So she's really pinning her hopes and dreams on this idea of testing and trying to play look, Democrats are trying to play the populist game right now. We're with you, the people. We've got this massive bill. We've got all of this stuff in here to help you. Of course, Republicans have genuine concerns about the amount of things that have been crammed into this thing. Money for illegal immigrants, money for tribal nations, cannabis protection, environmental protections, a rollback of President Trump's tax cuts for those blue states back in 2017, where it would cap your ability to file for state and local taxes at a cap of $10,000. So that's in this bill. There's a number of things in this bill, but again, could not it be a starting place for a negotiation? For the Senate Republicans to say, we're not really interested in this, is I don't know. I think Americans don't have a taste for this. Mitch McConnell, though, went on to talk further about where he sees this going. Listen.
Likelihood we'll do another bill, and I've just indicated what will need to be a part of any bill that actually gets a presidential signature and is brought up and passed by a Republican majority in the Senate.
You said wait to get word, but is word soon?
Look, I think we're all talking about this. I talked to the Secretary of the Treasury about it yesterday, to the President's Chief of Staff, and to the President recently about this. I think we all believe that another bill probably is going to be necessary, but I'm not prepared today to put a precise date on when that will be. What I can tell you is I told you earlier that it's going to include liability protections in order to get through the Senate and in order to be signed by the President. And we'll look at what the conditions are in the near future and decide how that ought to be crafted.
So there you go. Does that make you feel better? We're talking about it. We're going to talk about it. And liability protections for businesses. No talk of a stimulus check for the American people. No talk of extensions for state and local governments, hazard pay for those on front lines. No talk of testing. Nothing. We saw overnight that 5-minute test that was really touted by President Trump has failed about 50% of the time. The test results fail 50% of the time. So all of this talk about this 5-minute test that's going to be rolled out by the federal government, no bueno. So Republicans don't seem to be really in a hurry on this. Again, after Memorial Day is when they would consider this. And what are some of the things that are coming out of this right now? Let's listen to what Roy Blunt has to say about it, Senate Republican from Missouri. He said, after the recess, after the Memorial Day recess. And there are a couple of proposals floating around now from Republicans. I want to go into those. They've been looking for a way to incentivize workers to get back to work. Here's a proposal from Senator Rob Portman, a Republican from Ohio. He's floated with colleagues in recent days a proposal that would give workers an additional $450 plus their normal wages so that they could get back to work. Whatever your normal wage is, they would give you $450 to go back to that job. This would be an incentive for employers. It would be an incentive for employees. But again, nothing would come to the table until after Memorial Day. How do you feel about that? We'll pay you to go back to work. But what about all the businesses that have closed? How does that work? What is the stimulus for those people who now can't pay their bills because their employer closed their doors permanently? You know, Pennsylvania, one of our favorite little restaurants in West Reading, was a place called Wine Down, a little wine bar that we loved. Great little place to go grab a nice glass of wine. Closed. They couldn't sustain. I mean, that's the story all over this country. So what about those people? So that's great for those companies that are going to bring people back, and people are scared and they want to stay home and they'd rather collect unemployment benefits right now. So that's great for those people to kind of kickstart that piece of it. But what about all of those people that are out of work right now? So they don't think that this $3 trillion package is going to fly. Again, why couldn't we have some sort of opening discussion here as a starting point for negotiation? Again, Nancy Pelosi says that 80% of the priorities from Republicans were in the HEROES Act, 80%. So she's acknowledging that about 20% of this bill is liberal programs that they're concerned with. And of course you're going to have this back and forth. But while you're having this back and forth politically, people are dying, people continue to lose their jobs, people can't pay their rent, people can't pay their mortgages. I saw somebody in the chat ask about the Fed bank account. Now this is an interesting question, and I'll explain what they're asking here. I think it's a great question, because Jerome Powell the other day, they're limited. The Federal Reserve doesn't have spending power. They have the ability to put money into the economy to banks and make, lending power. Basically allow it to lend money to the banks so that they have the ability to keep mortgages flowing and keep money in the economy through banks and lending and all of that. If that were to shut down, it'd be a catastrophe. They're buying up different bonds, and junk bonds, and things like that, municipal bonds. That makes Wall Street happy. So Wall Street gets happy, banks get happy, and they're doing everything they can to keep that part of the economy rolling. But they don't actually write checks to the American people. But there is some word that this could be, we could make this legal. Right now it's illegal to do that. But what if the Fed said, you know what, Congress, you stink. We're going to set up federal bank accounts for every American, a Fed account. So you would have a Fed account, I would have a Fed account, and they would put $2,000 per month on your Fed account every month. And that would come from the Federal Reserve. There is some movement on this. There is some discussion. Could the Fed step in and do this? Jerome Powell seems to say, look, if Congress doesn't get their act together, we are going to be in for a major depression. And we're already there. They're very hesitant to use the word depression because they know that their words move markets. So if Jerome Powell comes out and says depression, markets go down, etc. But his message the other day was pretty dire. I mean, you look at this data, 36 million Americans out of work. That's a depression. That's bigger than the Great Depression. And it took 2 decades for us to recover from the Great Depression. It took 5 years for us to come back from the Great Recession a few years ago. Why? Because we had stimulus money injected into the economy, into the American people's hands, and that helped move things more quickly. There was stability in the markets thanks to the Fed, and so they're doing their part of it. The Fed is doing their part of it, but Congress is not doing their part. So let me just shoot down this idea of reopening as the answer. I want to talk about reopening right now because if Congress thinks, Republicans in Congress believe that reopening is the solution to all of our problems, I think they need to start studying some of the data a little bit more closely. I mean, if we just put aside the fact for a moment, the virus, right? The reopening would spike in cases and we'll have to roll back and go back to the beginning where we started from again. Other lockdowns, spikes in cases, more death, right? We're already at 86,000 deaths in the United States. Put that aside if we could, like if we could somehow magically separate it. Let's just look at reopening in certain states that already have eased restrictions. Georgia. I want to particularly focus on Georgia, which have eased restrictions and allowed people to kind of get back. What they've noticed is that people aren't taking them up on this. And people are still staying home for their own protection. So people are actually, just because the economy opens and the state says, guess what, you can go do your own thing again, a lot of people are saying, well, I don't really trust the government. I don't trust my elected leaders. If I leave the house and I'm 70 years old, there's a good chance that I might not make it back tonight because I could catch a respiratory infection, all of this, and it could ruin my life. Or I could bring it home to my sick family. You never know. But only 6%, listen to this, of people have actually gone out and decided to go to the stores again. 6%. That means that 80 or 94%, if you take out some numbers and variables there, about 90% of people are saying, I'm not going out. This is too soon. We're still seeing cases popping up all over the place. Why would I go out? So this idea that reopening is the answer, when most Americans are being, I think, pretty smart and saying, I'm going to be cautious here. I don't need to rush back into anything. It's not important to me to go get that breakfast sandwich at that local diner right now. I'll go get takeout or curbside pickup if I need that breakfast sandwich so bad. So again, separating that from the virus shows us that just reopening is not the answer. But we even saw, and I want to keep our eyes on what's going on in Wisconsin. And I want to hear from all of you that are in Wisconsin. What do you think about this? We'll look at some of your comments here in a second. But this is Wisconsin, of course. Some real troubling news out of Wisconsin, as now you have, of course, the court ruling. President Trump calling it, quote, a big win. The people want to get on with their lives. He called the court victory there a big win. And he said the place is bustling. He said the place is bustling. Then Wisconsin governor, so two different opposing parties here, Republicans, Democrats. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evans said that he's worried of massive confusion after his stay-at-home order was thrown out Wednesday by the courts. So now, what do people do? The governor makes an order and the state Supreme Court squashes it. Now, in other states this has happened, the courts have upheld the governor's rulings. So it's a weird mix of states across the country right now with these rulings. Some bars filled up within hours, basically picked up their St. Patrick's Day celebrations from where they left off. Crowded into the bars. Take a look at this bar in Wisconsin. This is Nick's Bar. This was 45 minutes after the bars opened in Wisconsin. Look at that. 45 minutes. They were flooded with people. Everyone's sitting there. No one's in a mask. No one's in like any kind of a face shield. They're all right on top of each other like sardines. The reason I bring this up is, look, I would love to go to a bar, but we saw exactly what happened in South Korea, right? South Korea was really the beacon of hope. It was a shining example of the world, how they clamped down on coronavirus through testing, got rid of it basically, and then they reopened, and then immediately they saw spikes at nightclubs. All of these spikes in nightclubs because everyone was crammed together. And then guess what? They had to close back down again. Germany as well. So would you want to go to this? Be out at a nightclub like this, sitting that close right on top of each other, next to some sweaty dude, you know, at a bar, drinking a Miller Lite? You know, can't you get a Miller Lite at home? Or whatever you're drinking there, Natty Ice, whatever they're drinking. I don't know. Or at least go to a bigger bar where you have some space in between each other. So we got to keep our eyes on Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin is going to be a perfect example of this idea of reopening as the solving to all of our problems. Let's look, let's look at the cases, the virus part of it, right? The spikes in cases, if there is anything. But then let's also look at the other side of it, which is the economic resurgence. Will Wisconsin, as a result of reopening, become like a beacon of economic resurgence? Or will it look like Georgia, which is very few people are taking them up on it. 6% are going out and doing the things that they hadn't been doing before. So will Wisconsin be any different? Maybe if the bar scene looks a little different. I'm not sure. What about homeschooling? How many of you right now would want to continue homeschooling if we reopen? Well, take a look at these new numbers. I find this shocking. 40% of families say that they're more likely right now when the pandemic ends to homeschool. This is according to a Real Clear Politics poll released on Thursday. 40% of families are more likely now to choose to homeschool their children than to send them back. Would you do that? I can tell you there's no way in the world I would. I mean, I love my 3 kids, but please get out of the house. And I've just got to say, like, the teachers at their school, they've done a phenomenal job. I don't know how they do it, but they do an amazing job of, everything that they're teaching them. They're doing an amazing job. So it really reinforced to me how difficult it is to try to teach 3 children and to try to do it at home. I know, many people love the homeschooling, and I'm a fan of it in certain ways. Like, hey, you could travel, you could do whatever you want. You could go to Prague, you could go to Canada, you could go wherever, and you could be homeschooling and traveling the world with your kids. Great, I get that part of it. In the real estate space, I've got a lot of my friends that invest in real estate that love doing that. My friend Joe McCall, who travels to Prague every year for 2 months with his kids, and they do homeschooling. He's like, you got to get on this bandwagon, man. I'm like, no. I'm fine to let the experts handle raising my children. Now, when it comes to teaching them personal finance and how to build passive income and start a business, that's what I'll teach them. Then that's when I step in and try to teach them those parts of running a business that I know how to do, because you're never going to learn that in school. There are certain things you're going to definitely learn in school: how to read and write essays, and understand social studies, and all those pieces. But all of that other piece, that's stuff that needs to be taught from me. That's never going to be taught in school, because schools set you up to work for somebody else, to be a W-2 employee and to become part of the college system, go through that. And so my kids understand that that's not where we intend for them to go. But there's no way. There's no way. We've enjoyed it for the quarantine time, but there's no way I'd want this to continue. What about you? Would you guys want to be one of the 40% that plan to homeschool permanently when when this all is over with? Not me, my friends, not me. And plus, with all the with all the kids being home, they just wear out. They just wear out Grover so much. He's exhausted. He's like, "Can you guys go back to school? I just need some space. You're running me ragged, forcing me to sleep all the time." So that's the latest on the reopening. What about now from Secretary Ben Carson on this piece of extending the deadline right now, these moratoriums on evictions? So many people being hurt by this, so many people being hurt by not being able to pay rent and the threat of eviction that's looming over them. This is a big piece of the House of Representatives legislation, the HEROES Act, which would include $100 billion for rental assistance. There's multiple layers to that. There's Section 8 benefits in there. There's Section 202 housing benefits in there. There's veterans benefits included in the Democrats' proposal. There's extensions of the SNAP program, an additional 15% for SNAP program for food. So there was a lot focused on housing in this bill. There was also a lot for mortgage relief in this bill, up to $75 billion for mortgage relief. So if this thing is dead on arrival, never makes its way through the Senate, what then? What then? Well, Secretary Ben Carson was asked about this, and this deadline is coming up here, folks. This deadline in June for this extension of the moratorium on evictions is coming up pretty soon. Do we need a nationwide extension on this plan? And here is what Secretary Carson had to say about it.
Well, the principle, again, being that we have to maintain the infrastructure in an appropriate way. We can't let it be destroyed and have to start all over again. So we will do what is necessary in order to do that.
You said it's going to be temporary. I mean, another 3 million Americans filed last week for unemployment benefits. We've now seen more than 36 million in a matter of weeks, Secretary Carson. It doesn't seem like it's just going to snap back.
Well, we anticipated, obviously, because we intentionally shut down the economy. Recognize that this is a very, very strong economy upon which this is built, as opposed to back in 2008, that was a very weak economy. So it took an extended period of time for it to return. In this case, a lot of underbrush is being burnt off. There's no question that some businesses won't come back. But the ground is still very fertile, and people are still very innovative and entrepreneurial, and things will come back.
There you go. That's the secretary right there, Ben Carson, talking about maybe we don't need to extend this moratorium on evictions because the ground underneath our economy is stable. It's unlike the 2008 recession. But when you have 36 million people out of work, the Great Recession, I mean, think about how many people lost their jobs during the Great Recession. We were roughly at about 10% unemployment. 10% unemployment. And it took 5 years to recover from that. We're at 36 million and rising. The foundation is strong. What foundation are we talking about? I'm just curious. I would love to know. A question for him is what is that foundation right now? What is so stable that we don't need an extra stimulus? We don't need an extension for moratoriums for evictions so people will be homeless and thrown out of apartments and condos. What is so stable? He says we have an entrepreneurial spirit. That's great. Yes. But if we can't get people to work, we can't get this economy burning and churning again, then what? I'm curious what that foundation actually is. Manufacturing has fled to China. What foundation are we really talking about? We were really living in an information economy in the United States. The sale of information is what really the United States is now. We're this information economy. We're not in a manufacturing economy anymore. So what exactly is this foundation? I would love to know. Let me know in the chat what you think is the foundation of this. Do you think we need an extension of the eviction moratorium in this country beyond just this June deadline? And are you hopeful that just by reopening, this will solve all of our problems? I don't buy it. I've been around Washington and congressmen for way too long in my career, and I don't know what they're looking at. I just think that they're looking at data. I don't know what data. I would love to see the data they're looking at. Share with us the data you're basing this off of. please, I would love to see that. And Senate Republicans say we're not going to take this thing up, any kind of a stimulus bill until after Memorial Day. And even then, it looks like the proposals would just be incentives for employees to get back to work with an additional $450 on top of their wages. Again, this does not account for the people that are out of work, whose employment has now disappeared because the business closed. I talked yesterday about Steak and Shake, 57 stores closing. Potbelly, 100 stores closing. Macy's closing. You have on and on, these companies are filing for bankruptcies. You're going to see a surge in bankruptcies and companies closing. All of those strip malls that you're used to seeing crowded with cars, all those little shops that always lived sort of month to month are going to be closing because they couldn't sustain themselves through this time. They didn't get PPP loans in time. They didn't get government assistance. They were told to close their doors, and they had to lay people off. And that's the same in brick and mortar and software development companies. I've spoken to CEOs of software development companies. They all worked remotely. They didn't even have really an office space to speak of, and they had to lay off almost their entire workforce. So this is, again, this foundation is strong. I agree. I saw, 3.5% unemployment in February. We were a really strong economy, it seemed, but there also seemed to be some real shakiness to that, exuberance, massive amounts of debt. So again, I would love to know what it is that makes them think that we can bounce back here by the fall. That's what we're hearing. We'll be back by the fall. We'll all be going to NFL games in the fall. We'll be eating churros and hot dogs at a Phillies game in the fall. I'd like to know. I really would. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on all this. Thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. If you're new here, please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button and leave us a like. I'd love to see us get up to, we have almost 7,000 people watching right now. Can we click the little like button? Let's try to get 7,000 likes if we can on this video. Let's break a record on this Friday if we can. And also want to thank today our sponsor, Webull. Of course, oops, I hit the wrong button. So you can get 3 stocks. People are asking in the chat, what's up with them? It's just a free stock trading app you download on your smartphone. Use that link, though, to get it. You have to go to that link and you get 3 stocks valued up to $1,400 just for opening the account. And, and they're giving away more premium stocks to Apple, Google. They emailed me today to celebrate their 2nd anniversary and said, please share with your audience if they want these free stocks. We're giving away an additional stock today for their anniversary, their 2nd anniversary. So please sign up for that. We'll have that in the description of the video as well. It's just morrisinvest.com/Webull. That's our website, and that's our direct link.